Welcome to the Nation of History channel. Be sure to subscribe and like so you don't miss out on more videos like this one. The growing value placed on feminine image gained strength in the 1950s and 1960s, with movie stars such as Sofia Loren becoming symbols of elegance and charisma, marking a period when beauty standards began to influence fashion, behavior, and popular culture after the war. Among the wreckage where the World Trade Center towers once stood, the aircraft warning antenna remained visible on September 13, 2001, 2 days after the September 11th attacks, a moment that would deeply mark global politics and begin a new phase of international conflict. Charles Duke, astronaut of the Apollo 16 mission, made history in space exploration by leaving a photograph of his family on the lunar surface in 1972, a gesture that symbolizes the human bond present even in the greatest technological achievements of the United States space race. British children wearing protective equipment head to a shelter during a drill in London in 1938, reflecting public anxiety over possible air attacks in the coming World War II, marked by civilian preparations driven by fear of attacks involving toxic substances. Mike Tyson, beside his trainer Cus D'Amato, prepares for his professional debut in 1985, the starting point of a career that would change world boxing, reinforcing D'Amato's strategic importance in turning Tyson into a sports phenomenon and a symbol of that decade. Helmets equipped with built-in communication devices marked major technological advances in motorcycling during the 1960s, allowing better coordination between professional riders and teams in competition and contributing to safety in increasingly faster races. German youth and American soldiers moved around Frankfurt together in the years after World War II, symbolizing the beginning of United States cultural influence in West Germany, a phenomenon that marked the country's social and political rebuilding after 1945. British workers head to their lunch break in a shipyard in Glasgow around 1944, a period when the Scottish shipbuilding industry gained strategic importance by contributing vital vessels to the Allied war effort in World War II. Thousands of young people challenged the authoritarian government by staging protests in Beijing in 1989, an event that led to the Tiananmen Square episode, when the Chinese government forcefully suppressed a broad movement for democratic reform, deeply marking contemporary history. The collar of an enslaved person in ancient Rome bears an inscription instructing anyone to capture and return the wearer to Zoninus in exchange for a gold coin, showing common practices of social control in that period when slavery supported an essential part of the economy and the established order. The Titanic, shown in dry dock in 1912, symbolized the peak of British naval engineering before its famous maiden voyage, whose outcome after striking an iceberg echoed worldwide and led to advances in international maritime safety rules. The return of British soldiers to the United Kingdom after the end of World War II marked a moment of intense national emotion, as families and loved ones were reunited after years of separation and uncertainty, symbolizing Allied victory and hope for social and economic rebuilding. During the American Indian Wars, Buffalo Calf Road woman stood out for her bravery and was recognized for her decisive action against Colonel George Custer in 1876, a major episode of the Battle of Little Bighorn that symbolized Native resistance in the face of United States military pressure. Children dependent on the so-called iron lung illustrate the devastating impact of polio before large-scale vaccination was introduced in the 1950s, when scientific progress brought relief to the fear affecting families in many parts of the world, especially in the United States. During the Blitz in 1940, London civilians sought protection in subway tunnels to shelter themselves from intense air attacks carried out by the German government, marking a crucial period of World War II in which the resilience of the population became a national symbol of the United Kingdom. German soldiers dealt every day with the danger of bombardment in the trenches of the Western Front around 1917 during World War I, a conflict marked by heavy artillery use and troop exhaustion that transformed modern warfare and European society. Audie Murphy became the most decorated soldier in United States history during World War II in the 1940s, receiving many medals for bravery. His example inspired generations and showed the decisive role of American soldiers in the global conflict. Lowell H. Smith and John P. Richter carried out the first aerial refueling in San Diego, California on June 27, 1923, an event that marked the beginning of a new era for military and civilian aviation, allowing aircraft range and endurance to expand. Chris, a sled dog from Captain Scott's Antarctic expedition of 1910, is shown listening to a gramophone on the polar ice in 1911, showing the forms of entertainment and human adaptation present during major scientific expeditions of the heroic age of Antarctica. The figure of the tallest man in the world, recorded here beside his father, recalls the fame achieved by Robert Wadlow in the 1930s, whose extraordinary height became a medical and cultural phenomenon, revealing the effects of acromegaly and the global attention given to his case. Residents of London in 1919 take part in the 2 Minutes Silence, a collective act that honored the memory of soldiers who lost their lives in World War I, which had just ended in 1918, strengthening public mourning and establishing a tradition of reverence for the victims of that time. The cultural frenzy surrounding Marilyn Monroe in the late 1950s reflected the peak of Hollywood's influence on behavior and consumer habits, a period when movie stars began to set social and lifestyle trends, especially in cosmopolitan cities such as New York. Brigitte Bardot became an icon of pop culture and a symbol of women's liberation in the late 1960s, a period marked by deep changes in social customs, when movements for individual freedom and expression were gaining strength around the world. Brigitte Bardot became one of the major cultural icons of the 1950s, establishing herself as Europe's leading sex symbol amid the explosion of commercial cinema after the war, helping shape a new model of feminine freedom that influenced generations of artists and women. Celebrated as one of the most famous spies of World War I, Mata Hari also became known for her exotic dance performances that shocked and fascinated audiences in Europe, leaving a legacy marked by controversy and debate over her actual guilt. Max Schreck, famous for playing the vampire in the expressionist film Nosferatu, became a symbol of German horror cinema by starring in the production released in 1922, a period marked by the artistic energy of the Weimar Republic and the cultural impact of Expressionism. The French warship Jean Bart became a symbol of the conflict between Allied forces and Vichy regime troops when it was bombed by the United States in Casablanca during Operation Torch on November 16, 1942, a crucial episode in securing the Allied advance in North Africa. Anwar Sadat, Jimmy Carter, and Menachem Begin led the Camp David negotiations in 1979, a fundamental milestone for the signing of the peace agreement between Egypt and Israel, bringing the first official recognition of the Israeli state by an Arab country and upsetting old regional alliances. Members of Easy Company of the 2nd Battalion, 506th Parachute Infantry Regiment, took part in major episodes during World War II, including the arrival at Eagle's Nest in 1945, a symbolic milestone in the weakening of the German government in the Bavarian Alps. Canadian troops celebrate victory at the Battle of Amiens in August 1918, a decisive turning point in World War I that launched the 100 Days Offensive, speeding up the collapse of German forces and directly contributing to the end of the conflict later that year. At the height of the Great Depression, Central Park became a refuge for hundreds of unemployed people who built improvised shelters there known as Hoovervilles, expressing the deep social crisis that marked New York in 1933 and showing the impact of the economic downturn. Residents built improvised communities known as Hoovervilles in Central Park during the Great Depression as a way to survive mass unemployment and evictions, showing the social and economic crisis that deeply marked the United States in 1932. Passengers aboard the Rex Smith airplane, developed in Maryland in 1912, show the excitement surrounding early 20th century aviation innovation, a period marked by advances that paved the way for the technological leap of civil and military aviation in the decades that followed. The gathering of the entire British Concorde fleet on January 21, 1986, at Heathrow Airport marked a symbolic moment in supersonic aviation, highlighting the technological peak reached by the project amid high costs and environmental debate that limited its commercial use. Alfredo Di Stefano, a central figure of Real Madrid, was seen in 1964 during a pause on the team bench, something common among athletes of the time, since awareness of how certain habits affected athletic performance only grew decades later. Seth Kinman, a famous hunter and trapper from California, became known for presenting a chair made of grizzly bear parts to the United States President in 1865, an episode that symbolizes contact between Old West culture and political power in post-Civil War America. The launch of the first mobile phone in 1973 marked a revolutionary advance in communication, making it possible for the first time to place calls away from fixed locations, despite early technical limits such as its size of 9 inches and a slow recharge time of 10 hours. George Dyler was recognized as the Midlands beer drinking champion in 1954, showing a British regional tradition of celebrating popular contests of endurance and sociability, elements that helped strengthen pub culture in everyday life in post-war England. The visit of civilians to the deck of HMS New Zealand in Vancouver in 1913 reflects the diplomatic practice of British naval power on the eve of World War I, when displays of strength abroad showed imperial influence and tightened ties with the dominions of the British Empire. Indigenous burial rituals on raised platforms, as seen in the 1912 record, show traditional practices of native nations in North America, which aimed to protect their dead from animals and symbolized ancestral respect, highlighting the impact of colonization on these cultures. Excavations in Pompeii in 1961 continued a vast international project begun in the 19th century to uncover the city destroyed by the eruption of Vesuvius in 79 AD, allowing important advances in archaeology and bringing aspects of Roman daily life to light. A Royal Air Force armorer preparing a bomb for a mission against Italian forces highlights the strategic setting of the conflict in 1940, when World War II was intensifying on the Mediterranean fronts and strongly influencing the outcome of fighting in that region. The development of a piano specially designed for bedridden people, highlighted in Great Britain in 1935, reflects advances in accessibility and inclusion in musical practice, showing growing social concern for rehabilitation and well-being in hospitals during that period. Athletes from different countries competed in wrestling matches among the ruins of the Basilica of Maxentius and Constantine during the Summer Olympic Games held in Rome in 1960, an event that revived classical elements of Roman culture and reinforced the unifying role of international sport. The last queen consort of Mongolia held a crucial symbolic role, during the final years of the Mongolian monarchy, marked by intense political change around 1923, when the country faced the end of the Bogd Khan dynasty and the growing influence of Soviet power over local politics. Wayne Gretzky, considered the greatest hockey player of all time, established himself as the leader of one of the greatest dynasties in the National Hockey League by winning the Stanley Cup 4 times, a feat that elevated the sport in Canada and redefined standards of excellence in the 1980s and 1990s. Records such as the one from 1926, linked to the first detailed astronomical observations of Mars, were fundamental to the progress of modern astronomy and increased interest in the search for life on the red planet, reinforcing the importance of telescopes in scientific research. A huge sea bass was recorded as the largest ever caught, showing the culture of fishing records that grew in the United States during the first decades of the 20th century, a period marked by the celebration of sporting feats and advances in photographic record-keeping. With the growing mass production of automobiles in the United States, companies such as Chevrolet strengthened their national presence, especially in the 1920s, when the rise of carrier trucks revolutionized distribution, making cars more accessible in different cities and driving urban and economic growth. Women gathered on a beach during the 1940s illustrate the popularization of portable radio, a symbol of modern life and shared leisure in a time of social change after World War II, when technological advances began to become part of daily family life in different countries. Drive-through stores appeared in the United States amid urban growth, as shown by businesses in Los Angeles in the 1940s, a context in which the spread of automobiles changed city habits, boosted convenience, and redefined retail in major urban centers. Veterans of the film industry and entertainment personalities often gathered at gala events such as the Academy Awards, whose 1973 edition was marked by visual innovations, political protest, and the redefinition of the red carpet as a stage for international fashion. Couples who used tandem bicycles in the 19th century represented the progress of technological innovation in urban mobility, especially after 1886, when this model helped establish bicycles as both leisure and transportation, marking social changes in city life. The presence of the Deadwood and Delaware smelter in Deadwood, South Dakota in 1890 marks a crucial phase of the American gold rush, when industrial growth and mining drove the local economy, transforming villages into prosperous towns in the Old West. Charles S. L. Baker and his assistant present an innovative heating radiator system, a technology highlighted in 1906 in the search for thermal comfort solutions in rapidly urbanizing cities, a milestone that influenced the development of modern home heating. Manute Bol, famous for his height of 7 feet 7 inches, stood out in United States college basketball during the 1980s, becoming known as one of the most remarkable defenders before entering the National Basketball Association, which fueled debate over the role of foreign athletes in American sports. Victor Fleming, responsible for directing major motion pictures, interrupted an unusual conflict between extras during the filming of The Wizard of Oz in 1938, one of the Hollywood classics that marked the transition to Technicolor film and redefined visual standards in the industry. Victor Fleming, responsible for directing major motion pictures, interrupted an unusual dispute among participants during the filming of The Wizard of Oz in 1938, one of the Hollywood classics that marked the transition to Technicolor film and redefined visual standards in the industry. Members of the Women's Royal Navy Service took on essential duties during World War II, such as carrying information and orders by motorcycle, reinforcing the active role of British women in the war effort and contributing to the modernization of women's social roles. Suzuki appears in this record tied to the completion of a new factory, highlighting the period of growing industrialization in 20th century Japan, when family companies expanded their operations and built brands that would become essential to the country's technological development. A frozen fountain became an attraction in Detroit during the harsh winter of 1906, a period when northern United States cities faced extreme weather, highlighting urban challenges before modern heating systems and infrastructure became widespread. Two travelers move along the road toward Bothell in the state of Washington, a typical scene of United States road development in 1927, a period when access to automobiles transformed mobility and drove the growth and integration of small towns. Central Park became one of New York's main gathering places after its official opening in 1876, becoming a symbol of American urban leisure with gondola rides on the lake and many activities that marked the integration of nature into the growth of the city. In the rural landscapes of Ireland, 3 generations of women uphold family traditions in front of a stone house, a typical scene in 1927, a period marked by intense social change after the country gained independence, reinforcing the essential role of women in everyday Irish life. The United States Rural Postal Service expanded into isolated areas in the early 20th century, with mail delivered by wagon in 1914 symbolizing the inclusion of thousands of families in the national flow of information, strengthening economic and social ties. Caravans of mules leaving Index, Washington around 1911 were a fundamental part of the local mining-driven economy, an activity that transformed towns in the northwestern United States with the arrival of workers, goods, and development, marking the region's gold and silver cycle. Dr. Elizabeth Broyne, working in a horse-drawn ambulance in the United States in 1911, represents the advance of women in medicine during the early 20th century, a period marked by the growing presence of women in professions once restricted to men. Meetings beneath the famous Marshall Field and Company clock on State Street symbolized part of Chicago urban life in the post-war years, a time when department store shopping thrived and served as a place for gathering and connection in American culture. The urban energy of New York in 1917 revealed the growing impact of industrialization and the automobile on daily life, marking a period when the city was becoming a symbol of modern progress, even amid the social and environmental changes typical of that decade. The famous Dodge City Cowboy Band, active in 1885, became a symbol of entertainment in the Old West by giving performances that drew crowds, spreading cowboy culture across the United States, especially during expansion into Western territories. British youth enjoyed new outdoor leisure habits shortly after World War I, while in June 1922, the social changes brought by the 1920s were growing, a period known as the Roaring Twenties, marked by important cultural advances. Rural women workers played a fundamental role in mountain areas such as Caen in northern Italy, especially in 1959, when manual farming techniques still predominated, supporting family traditions and ensuring local survival in a Europe undergoing rapid social change. The detailed recording of diseases and deaths, such as fever, apoplexy, and convulsions, shows the concern of European cities with gathering mortality statistics during the 17th century, a practice that helped the development of public health and the control of urban epidemics. A central figure of American capitalism, J.P. Morgan dominated the financial sector in the early 20th century, exercising decisive influence during crises such as the financial panic of 1907, when his actions helped prevent the collapse of major banks and solidified his legacy in economic history. The surgical amphitheater at Bellevue Hospital in New York symbolized the progress of hospital medicine in the early 20th century, when rooms designed for students and professionals to observe operations helped strengthen medical education and improve modern surgical techniques. Workers in Norwegian bakeries during the 1950s played an important role in preserving traditions after World War II, keeping recipes such as kransekake alive and reinforcing national symbols, marking a period of cultural rebuilding and renewed value for local identity. Residents of Prague confronted Soviet military vehicles with improvised firebombs in the streets on August 21, 1968, during the Warsaw Pact invasion of Czechoslovakia, a response to the reform movement known as the Prague Spring, whose hopes for freedom were harshly suppressed. American veterans of World War I gathered in 1978, remembering the conflict marked by trench warfare and unprecedented military technology, a war that established the United States as a global power and had deep consequences for 20th century politics. Passengers experienced the early days of transcontinental commercial flights aboard a Boeing 307 operated by Pan American World Airways in the 1940s, an important milestone that advanced civilian air travel and international connection during the modern age of aviation. With the introduction of the first elevators in hotels, represented by the Savoy's ascending room, the early 20th century marked a revolution in the lodging experience, encouraging urban vertical growth and making luxury hotels even more attractive to the elite. Automotive innovation stood out in Los Angeles when glass tops for convertibles inspired by the canopies used on military aircraft began to be produced in the 1940s, reflecting the strong influence of World War II technology on American civilian industry at that time. An original license plate dated 1978, with the number and letter pattern often used in Western Europe after the war, points to the adaptation of vehicle registration systems in the region, highlighting progress in standardization and automobile control during that period. The idea of the typist of the future, promoted in the 1970s, reflects the era's belief in automating office work, a moment when personal computers and accessories, such as headsets, began to transform offices and the role of typists. Students actively took part in hands-on learning in rural Canadian schools, as recorded in 1927 at a dairy school in Canada, an important period of government support for agricultural education to strengthen milk production and the economic development of local communities. If you enjoyed this video and want to support the channel, please use the Super Thanks tool below. Your contribution helps us keep bringing you amazing historical content. Thank you so much for your support, and see you in the next video.